Today we're going to do something a little bit different than we have been doing. I'm going to be taking questions from Twitter, from viewers, on any subject that has been sent in. So I want to thank those individuals who have submitted these questions, and in the future, if others want to do this, they can look at the bottom of the screen and find out where you can submit these questions to Twitter. One of the frustrations that I have had over the many years in public life has been that a lot of questions have been submitted to me by telephone, by messages, and email. Frustrated because I've never been able to answer them, sometimes incomplete addresses. But this is one thing I'm anxious to do because I always feel like I haven't answered enough questions. And today, on our first try on this, we have had a lot of good questions. And although I will put some initials or a first name down on a question, actually we've had several people on each question submit the question. So thank you for tuning in today. And let me take the first question right now. The first one comes from Walter. And he says, Ron Paul, what's your opinion on business licenses and sales tax? Does the government have this authority? Do these cause black markets? You know, this is really a good question and very rarely asked except somebody who's a little bit sophisticated in the freedom movement, because it's always assumed that licenses are important. And the justification for a license, whether it's a medical license or a plumber's license, is always to protect the consumer. The truth is, it's always to protect the monopoly and to control people. So they don't want entry. They don't want free entry, whether it's somebody that's cutting hair or a beautician or whatever. There are so many reasons for people wanting to keep people out, so therefore there is the license. And this to me is unnecessary. It's not legal. It's there for protection. Now, where does this authority come from? It doesn't come from the Constitution. The Constitution isn't set up and say that it's legal to do this. Matter of fact, since they don't give the authority, they don't even address it. The only way they address it is indirectly by not telling the states what to do. So under the Constitution, if a state has licensing, even though it may be bad and not good economic policy and not good moral policy, there's no federal prohibition against this licensing. But it certainly causes, you know, black markets to develop. People will try to do things on the side and get by with this. But licensing is not a good idea. Even the local authorities shouldn't be using it. I mean, if you're in the real estate business, you have a license, you can sell real estate and all these things. But a lot of people, especially the doctors, don't accept this idea that a doctor can't have a license. But it would be handled adequately. People are pretty sophisticated when they go and buy products. They're pretty sophisticated when they go and buy an automobile, and they have consumer groups looking after it. But the big thing in medicine is whether or not he has a license, whether or not he has a reputation, whether the medical society endorses what he does, whether the hospital accepts his credentials. So the license itself really hasn't protected the consumer. It usually keeps out the competition. It's a very good question. Okay, there's another one here from CI, another question. What's your take on the law passed in Louisiana prohibiting cash transaction at stores for second-hand goods? Well, I'll tell you what, this is terrible, and it's the beginning of what I've worried about for a long time. The cashless society is coming. We're getting so close to it, and we can blame the federal government and the Federal Reserve and the banking system always moving in this direction. But here it is, the local authorities doing this, and they want control. The tax collectors want control. That's why they want cashless transactions. But that's, you know, the true market. It is very, very dangerous to see the disintegration of the use of cash. And a lot of people are doing it voluntarily, you know, because it's convenient. It's real easy to swipe that card. It used to be that if I was in a line behind somebody that was going to use a credit card, I had to wait longer because they had to, it was too difficult. You had to sign things. Today, it's a swipe of a card. They go through the line faster than the people who pay cash. So it's very, very tempting. But it's also very tempting to give up your privacy by recording everything that you do. So the tax collectors like this. They want to know what transactions are there, and I think that any law that is prohibiting cash transactions is very bad, and I believe it's coming at the federal level. Matter of fact, it's already here. If you go walk into the IRS and you use what they call legal tender for all debts, public and private, and hand them a Federal Reserve note to pay your bill, they won't take this. So there's a lot of things already you can't use cash for, and this is a bad sign. It is true. It seems tempting because it's more convenient, but ultimately the ulterior motive is to find out what you're doing and to collect more revenues. Here's another question from Dean. Ron, do you think Edward Snowden will one day be able to live in the United States safely? Well, I'll tell you what, it's a tough question to answer because I don't think anybody knows that. I don't think he knows that. I don't even think our federal government knows it. I think he has a better chance now than he had a year ago. If he'd have come back when those individuals in Washington said, oh, he needs to face the music. If he's practicing civil disobedience, come back and face the music and go before the committees in Washington, that would have been not a very smart thing to do. Daniel Ellsberg strongly advised, don't do it. Ellsberg, you know, was the individual that released the papers, the Pentagon papers, about how we precipitated and started the Vietnam War. And even though he never went to prison, he suffered a lot from this and barely escaped going to prison. But his advice was don't do it. And that would be my advice, too. Maybe someday. And Edward Snowden is better off today because of the recent court ruling that said that the Patriot Act never authorized this type of surveillance on the American people, which means that the whistleblower, Edward Snowden, didn't break the law. He was obeying the law and pointing out where the government was disobeying the law. So this was quite different. The government is the one. So this has helped Edward Snowden. So he has a chance. If the movement moves in the right direction, yes, he might come back. But, you know, the sentiment of the people have a lot to do with this. If the hatred is built up and the scaremongers are using it and call him a traitor and all these things, and that prevails, he's not going to be able to come back. But if it moves in the opposite direction, as it is slightly shifted, because a lot more people now respect him more as a hero than they did when this first broke. So I would say I'm hopeful that someday he will come back and be able to live in this country and be an American citizen with rights again. The odds right now aren't that good. He wouldn't dare do it right now, but only time will tell. And that is sad that I can't say, well, he's an American citizen. He didn't commit a real crime. He only was explaining why government was breaking the law. He wasn't breaking the law. He was exposing the government. I would say that the odds aren't very good that he's going to come back very soon. But let's hope that happens. This helps spread the message of exactly why he should be respected and not demeaned. Here's a letter from E.E. Cowboys Nation. Ron Paul, how do we phase out the Federal Reserve? How do we phase it out with difficulty? Of course, I've had a plan for phasing out the Federal Reserve, like a bill in Congress to repeal the Federal Reserve Act. That would do it. That's how it came into being. A Federal Reserve Act passed under very suspicious conditions, and on a midnight vote on Christmas Eve back in 1913. So that's how it was created. So the people's elected body, the Congress, helped create this, even though it was organized and planned in the collusion of the big bankers. But if the Federal Reserve Act was repealed, the Federal Reserve would be demolished and we'd get rid of it. But that's not going to happen, unfortunately. Matter of fact, even as adamant as I am about getting rid of the Fed, if you got rid of it in one day, that's going to not be the solution. That's going to cause a bit of havoc. But phasing it out is a good idea. Now, how can we get support of the American people, which we are getting more now than we have in the history of the Fed because of this crisis since 2008. More people have awakened to find out that there's a lot of shenanigans going on. The Fed bails out the big guys, and they punish the poor people. They punish the taxpayers. They buy up all this debt that people made trillions of dollars on and dumping it on the taxpayers by the Fed buying this debt. So the Fed, could be phased out by tinkering on the edges. But the most important thing to get the people's support is to audit the Fed. Know what they're doing, and this will rally the people to the point where they say enough is enough. And it may well come with the next crisis, which is fast approaching. So we want to take advantage of that and keep beating away at the illegality. It's immoral, it's illegal, it's unconstitutional, but people generally didn't understand it and didn't want to pay any attention to it. But I think that is changing. But my guess is that it will phase itself out, that it will lose credibility. The dollar will lose reserve standing. It right now is on a downslope, and gold prices are still fairly strong. So eventually, when confidence is broken, the Fed really could just sort of dissipate from its power, because when that happens and dollars don't work very well, people will use alternative currencies, and that would help to phase out the Fed. That's not on the horizon. It's not going to happen next week or next year, but the more we expose the Fed for the shenanigans that they are involved in, the better it will be. The sooner we can phase it out and finally get rid of the Federal Reserve. We do not need a central bank. Jefferson didn't want a central bank. Unfortunately, Hamilton won out, and we've ended up with that notion that we need a central bank. Here's a question that comes from Maximum Freedom. Ron, do you ever vote for the lesser of two evils? Well, not on purpose, and I've always said the better slogan is the lesser of two evils is still evil. But there are conditions in Congress where you have to pick and choose what you do, and some people might misinterpret it. For instance, let's say there's a vote to take the income tax from 30% down to 20%. And so you vote for the income tax at 20%. Does that mean you have voted for the lesser of two evils? Somebody might argue that, but if you look at it more narrowly and you say, no, the vote was, can we reduce the income tax by 10% from 30% down to 20%? And that's obviously, should be a yes question. A lot of times there's some of these either or, and you will have an amendment, and the amendment won't be perfect, but it'll be a lot better than what's going to be on final passage. So yes, it's the lesser of two evils. The amendment bill is better than the one that they are working on. So I took my position was you vote for the amendment and the substitute, and try to win out and get rid of the bad bill. But then when it comes to final passage, you still have another vote that you don't have to vote for, say, the lesser of two evils. So it gets a little bit murky there. And another thing, another principle that I adhered to in Congress was how to have an interim period, shifting away from where we are, how to cut something without immediately causing the revolution to break out. But transitions aren't working very well, so my ideas have not worked very well. But the way that would work is to take a bill, let's say $10 billion to operate our security in Iraq. Well, you know my position on that. We shouldn't even be there. We should come home. So save $10 billion in Iraq. But you can't, there's only going to be 10% that might vote for that. But somebody might vote for it because they sort of don't like what's going on in Iraq, but they'd like to see that money spent elsewhere. Well, if you save $10 billion and you spend $5 billion on some programs that people say, hey, that's good, we're going to get more money for a program, which, I wouldn't be supportive of. But if you do that, if you vote for that, at the same time you save $5 billion, I say, well, it's less than perfect. I don't see this as voting exactly for the lesser of two evils, even though I'd rather spend money here at home for a bridge than to blow up bridges overseas. So somebody might argue, well, you're being inconsistent. You're voting for the lesser of two evils. But one thing is although that theoretically might move us in the right direction, it never seems to happen. The people don't go along with it because the Fed is always there, and the conservatives and liberals get together, and they vote for the militarism and blowing up bridges overseas, as well as they vote for the bridges and the domestic and the welfare here at home. And that's the fault of the system. Deficits don't matter. Printing money doesn't matter. And the process continues. That's why I say this all changes when you destroy the dollar in itself. A Tea Party ally, do you think too much Muslim immigration could be a problem for this nation? Muslim Sharia law clashes with the Constitution. Well, obviously Sharia law does, but people worry about Sharia law, and they say, well, they're going to institute Sharia law in our town next week, and it's going to usurp all the rights in the Constitution. Well, if that happened, isn't there something wrong with us? I mean, why would we ever sit back and say, well, no, Sharia law is going to be there. We're going to start stoning people and having law like they have in Saudi Arabia, and beheadings and chopping off hands? No, there'd be something wrong with us. So, if we even moved in that direction, it would be our own fault for us, capitulating. So on immigration's a different situation. People get really worked up on this, whether it's some coming from the South or Muslims coming in. I think that is sort of a symptom. It's a scapegoat in a way. Immigration per se is not bad. What is bad is people coming to this country, if they would want to give a Sharia law and that was their whole goal, and they cause violence to do it, yeah, that's a different issue, though. But if people come to this country, let's say we had massive immigrations from every place in the world, like sometimes we have, but they all endorse the principles of liberty. They all endorse personal property and a moral standard, which meant that you couldn't live off somebody else and you could never use force. Who cares what their religious beliefs on? I've talked for so many years about, if you understand liberty and the First Amendment, everybody gets to use the First Amendment that they want. So if Muslims come in, and I know quite a few Muslims in my own hometown, and if they come in and live peacefully and they practice their religion, there's no aggression, well, how can anybody, complain about that? That makes the difference, whether people want to come in and live under American law and non-aggression and non-violence. There should be no challenge and no worry about exactly who comes in. It's what they believe in and what kind of a system that we have. I have one more question here for today. Sirian, what is your opinion on direct democracy, where the citizens themselves make law rather than elected representatives? This is a good question because we weren't given a democracy. The tradition has always, Franklin said it's a republic. And truly, I think in minimal government, where it's very, very limited and not much legislation and going on, a republic is good. You elect a few representatives, and if you have to tinker with a minor law, which they should all be, I would say that's a good way to do it. But I also like the referendum, so it's sort of a mixture. Referendum is pure democracy, and you can put it on the ballot. You have to get so many signatures. So the states, there have been some states that have done this and used the referendum to actually curtail the legislative bodies. So that might be a little bit of pure democracy and not pure representative government, but I think it's sort of a mixture, and I like that, where you can have that as a backup. But there's one place where I like pure democracy, and that has to do with economics. Because in a free market economy, the consumer is king. Labor unions don't run things, business people don't run things, bankers don't run things, politicians don't run things. But the success of a business depends on how people spend their money. And we still have a good taste of this. People buy computers and cell phones and pick out the good ones, and prices come down, and it's great, but they get to vote. So and this is why wage and price controls are so bad, because then you're forcing people to accept certain conditions. So you don't want the government telling what the wages are. You don't want to bail out businesses because they have to make profits. You don't want to protect bad businesses because of so-called antitrust laws. You want the consumer to make the decision, and the consumer is pretty good. But once you interfere with all these conditions, labor costs and business profits and interest rates that benefit somebody, it's a mixed bag. So yes, pure democracy is okay when it's voluntary, it's by the consumer. The consumer should be made king, and in a free society, that is what happens. So it's just sort of like in social liberty too. Everybody gets to make their own decisions, and the regulations don't come in on your religious beliefs and your social behaviors and sexual beliefs. As long as there's not violence, you get to vote on your own on that, and that part is a consequence of a true republic and true liberty, is that the people get to make the voluntary choices, and under those circumstances, pure democracy is okay. Let your dollars count and punish those who don't give you a good deal. Anyway, I hope you found this program interesting. We'd like to do this again, so just take a glance on the bottom of this page to find out how you can submit a question to Twitter. And please come back to the Liberty Report soon.